Welcome to episode 67 of Reading Between the Reels. Tonight, we're talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm Craig Dickinson, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Adam Bray, a prolific author and Marvel expert. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Adam, I'm gonna start. We usually start with our overall thoughts on Guardians on the movie. So, what are your overall thoughts on the movie Guardians of the Galaxy? What are some of your takeaways?
As far as the original, it's kind of the Star Wars of Marvel. I think James Gunn took a really obscure comic book series that most Marvel fans had probably never heard, casual fans had probably never heard about, and he kind of made it the central, most popular, fun thing in Marvel Studios. So I think he really pulled a George Lucas with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So they're characters we all love, and I'm kind of scared and sad. It kind of sounds like this number 3 that this might be the end of it. So.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way. I'm kind of mixed emotions on it. I kind of want it to end on a high note and not limp off, you know? But rewatching it this time, I was amazed how much I actually really enjoyed it. I mean, I've always liked the movie, but it's a lot more serious than I remember it being. I think once we started to see those characters in like the kind of the crossover movies, some of the Avengers movies, they kind of become caricatures a little bit. But I love what you said about it's kind of the Star Wars of the MCU. There's also like some Raiders of the Lost Ark influences clearly on there, but I mean, can't go wrong with that. You can Star Wars and Raiders. That's pretty good company. Yeah, and so what I really wanted to kind of drill down in is some of the bigger aspects of it. Of the film, and I was going to start just with cinematography, and we just talk about composition, camera work, and just colors that stand out. And it's a beautiful film. Like the colors are amazing. The purple jumped out at me for one, which is interesting. The Power Stone obviously is purple, and Morag, where it's found, is purple. And what I love about that is that we usually think of purple like with royalty, but it is with power. It literally is a color that is associated with power, so it's a very appropriately colored item. But my favorite angle that I really like this time, because I think it speaks a little bit to characterization, or favorite shot rather, is in the kiln, and it's where Rocket's telling the plan, and you got this great kind of triangle set up, and I love seeing that in composition where you've got Gamora's on the left, Peter's on the right, and Rocket's kind of in the center, and you see Groot in the foreground, kind of a little bit out of focus, not listening at all,
doing his own thing,
and it just doing his own thing, and then they just start and they scramble from there, and it's just like this is who these characters are so quickly. So I love how quickly they put that together.
Yeah, that was a hilarious scene.
So, were you familiar with the comic before the movie?
Not at all. Only as far as the promos for the movie, when various websites, would talk about, the history of the comics. That was all I really knew about it. And
same for me.
From what I've gathered after the fact in writing about Marvel, it's a very sordid, strange, very different from what we get in the movies. Very different mix of characters at times, and the characters have very different personalities. And James Gunn, he's taken what seems to me is a very messy comic series, which maybe at times to me as someone who didn't go along on the journey as it was written. Looking back on it, I don't really enjoy the comics like I do the movies. They don't those original runs of the Guardians of the Galaxy don't really appeal to me. I think after the movie came out, as with much of Marvel, they've tried to recenter the comics to more closely align with the movies. Not entirely, but make the characters look more like they do in the movies, and bring in some of the story aspects of the storyline into the comics so they can kind of match up a little. Marvel seems to do that with everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. As you're talking, a thought occurred to me too. Like, and I remember when this was first announced that it was kind of like, who are these guys? Why are they using these
Right.
characters? It's kind of out of left field, right? And what's interesting is, and this kind of goes back to cinematography too, is that there is this kind of lengthy exposition scene that
Mhm.
talks about the Infinity
Right.
Stones, where they're kind of like on
Hmm.
display, and it feels like this film is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the Infinity Saga. We haven't really even, I don't even know if we had heard the term Infinity Stones in the MCU before
Hmm.
this film. And so it kind of makes sense that even though these characters are, from this weird corner, that they set up, the big event that shows up in
Right.
2019. So it's like he kind of had to go really far out there to kind of come back to
Right.
this. Another thing, I mean, this is natural transition. I think that when we talk about the sound of Guardians, some things that I pointed out or noticed this time was I thought it was interesting that even though it's this real fantastical environment, that there's machine guns with kind of a typical Earth machine gun sound,
Right.
especially in the kiln. I noticed that a lot instead of laser
Hmm.
guns. But the main thing I look at is, of course, the
Hmm.
music, which, the soundtrack that, Gunn is on record as saying this is something that kind of grounds this really bizarre out of our world uh,
Hmm.
setting. But you have this familiar music that keeps showing up there. And Tyler Bates' score, I love.
Right.
This time listening through it too, I was like, this is such a good score. The Guardians theme, which I don't know if we hear
Yeah.
again after this film, is really well done. But of course, the music. And so I got to ask, out of what on these from the awesome
Hmm.
mix, do you have a favorite or a least favorite song that from that kind of stands out to you?
Um, there's some good stuff, and there's some things that I don't like that grinds on me a little bit. But I like that. I like that. I've got a hooked on a feeling song.
Yeah.
That's kind of their kind of a theme song, I guess, for the movie. So yeah, that's probably my favorite. But that
Yeah.
scene where that where it opens with Quill with Chris Pratt, dancing,
Yeah.
and using the little rats as microphones and stuff. That's just it's just a classic music scene.
Yeah. Yeah, I one thing that I love to point out on the show is the difference between diegetic and non-diegetic
Hmm.
music. Music that characters can hear with diegetic music, and this movie does a really interesting thing with blurring the lines
Hmm.
for that. Like you think that it's non-diegetic, like that opening scene, and it's like no, he's actually listening to
Hmm.
that as well as we are. It even starts with that. If I'm not in love song, which kind of setting the tone for the film, and then it's on Peter's Walkman. It does that a lot. It does it at the end with Ain't No Mountain High
Right.
Enough as well. I think my favorite one is I always forget it's on is Cherry Bomb. I
Hmm.
just like that just gets me pumped when they're walking down the hallway. That's good stuff. I also really liked a lot for vocal sounds that end scene. Now, I usually use this clip where he opens the second mixtape from his mom when I'm teaching kids in class how to listen for diegetic
Hmm.
music, how to listen for vocal sounds and sound effect, and let them know this is all Foley sound effect, him opening the drawer and unwrapping it, all that stuff. I love how they have Peter's mom reading the letter
Hmm.
because it just, oh man, it just sucks you in, and it's like it's hard not to have empathy for Peter in that moment.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And one thing that I noticed this time through too is that there's some really soft piano music playing while that's being
Hmm.
read, and it's the same music that's played in the hospital.
Okay.
So they kind of there's like a leitmotif that bounces back and forth. So I thought that was fairly
Right.
interesting. I don't know the name of the song, but again, Tyler
Hmm.
Bates just did an
He
amazing job, an
did.
underrated
Yeah.
job, I think, because the pop music is such,
Hmm.
that's the thing people think of, that the score is kind of just there in the background, but it's doing a lot of great
Right.
stuff. Is there anything else that you want to talk about with the sound before we talk about performances, which I think is probably the bulk of what we'll want to talk about?
Uh No, I just think you're right that Guardians the score is probably underrated. It's got a lot of personality to it. Yeah, the whole sound on the movie's great. Great sound effects too.
Yeah. It's interesting that Tyler Bates, as I mentioned, did the score for this, and I kind of by accident have been watching a lot of movies that he scored recently. Like I just rewatched Watchmen
Hmm.
and the John Wick series, and it's like, yeah, I really like this guy's music and didn't really know who it was. I just like happened to like all of these scores, and there's a
Hmm.
reason. It's the same guy who had done that, which is cool. So as we move down to performance, one of the things I love to pull up with this is just kind of favorite lines of dialogue.
Hmm.
Do you have a favorite line of dialogue or two from this film?
Oh, I don't know. There's so many great lines. It's
Really
hard to
are.
pick one. Um, I think not necessarily a lot. You know, yeah, I don't know. There's just so many good ones.
Yeah,
Everybody's got a few
there
good
really
lines.
are. Yeah, I mean, because this movie does, like we mentioned before, it does such a great job of setting up who these
Hmm.
characters are really, really quickly. So one that I pointed out was there's a couple exchanges with Peter and
Hmm.
Gamora where he kind of promotes
Hmm.
himself. You know, the first time they meet, she says, "You have the bearing of a man of honor," and he says, "Well, I wouldn't say that. People say it about me all the time." You know,
Right.
which is class. And then he's getting distracted, and she kicks him in the chest, and that's how that moves. I also really love when she's listening to the music for the first
Hmm.
time, and she basically screams at him, "The melody is pleasant."
Yeah,
It's like that's so
that's
Gamora.
funny.
But I think my favorite one is actually a Rocket quote, and it's a great scene where they're having they're trying to figure out whether or not they're actually going to
Hmm.
make a stand and try and go back and fight against Ronan. And finally, they're all standing up, and the Rocket says, "Now I'm standing. You all happy we're all standing up? No, a bunch of jackasses standing in a
Right.
circle." Because that's, of course, he would
Yeah.
do that. He's not going to be
Oh
sincere about
no.
it. And it strikes that balance that I think sometimes MCU movies kind of slip a little bit too far into the
Hmm.
comedy. Like you could let the moment sit
Yeah.
there, but with these particular characters, I think like it would be weird if they
Right.
didn't somebody call out the fact that this is kind of contrived.
Totally.
Do you have a favorite character from this cast?
You know,
I know that's a
again,
tough
it's a
one.
tough one. I like them all for their own reasons. You know, Quill is so well fleshed out, and Chris Pratt is great as the character and such a funny, likable guy. You know, he's a little bit of the everyman in him, and a lot of goofball. Gamora, I like just maybe as much for Zoe Saldana as for Gamora. And I just watched Avatar 2, so I'm in a Zoe Saldana mood. You know,
Yeah.
Groot is so lovable, um, and I love creatures, so he's impossible not to love. Rocket is hilarious. You know, he's a bit of a dirtbag, but he's also hilarious in
Yeah.
how stingy he is and selfish. Um, you know, Drax, he's got some really funny lines, especially in the second movie. I think he
Yeah.
just kind of gets funnier as he goes. So yeah, they're all good.
Yeah. They really are. This is the thing too with the characterization of Drax was another thing I noticed this time where they have that great line about, his, metaphors will go over his head, and he says, "Nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I'd catch it."
Right,
Where he's not aware of the fact that or metaphor, kind of,
right.
um, you know, finger across throat, but he's kind of more goofy. Like again, by the time we get to like Infinity War and Endgame, where I think I liked this version of Drax a little bit more. I don't know.
Right.
I'd forgotten that he was different, but he wasn't. a cartoon as much as he kind of
Right.
becomes. But I do want to point out too, what like with body language and facial expressions, that the things I was most impressed by are the two digital characters, because you see it multiple times where Rocket has kind of almost this grin of perverse joy, almost licking his lips when he gets that machine gun in the kiln, and his mouth just goes super wide. But Groot, especially, you mentioned Groot, he's really
He
expressive,
is. Yeah.
which is kind of amazing considering he's a tree.
Hmm.
Like the look of horror he has in there in that bar on Nowhere. He sees the one creature, the big creature, eat the smaller creature. And then, of course, played for laughs. He has that great big grin after he kills all the
Right.
cigars on the Dark Aster, just throwing them side to side.
Right.
I remember laughing quite a bit at that. But yeah, those two digital characters, so well expressive. And then still, this movie has tons of practical effects and lots of prosthetic makeup, which I guess great balance. And kind of going back to the Star Wars thing too, the things that we really liked about original
Hmm.
trilogy stuff was the
Right.
masks, right, for the aliens. And so, yeah, good stuff on that.
Yeah, they've there's a lot of aliens too in the background, where James Gunn has kind of standardized his own cast of alien species for Guardians of the Galaxy, and that's really very overlooked and underrated, and underplayed. That he's really developed his own Star Wars alien races in the background there. So that's something I would have loved to have brought out in some of my books. I hope there's a chance sometime to catalog all of them and point them out, because they are consistent within
Yeah,
each movie.
that would be great. I would love that. Love to be able. Who's that dude in the
Yeah.
background? I know that, like, even those little creatures, what they're called, Orlones, I
Hmm.
think. They're all over the place. They show up in the second movie on different
Right.
planets as well. That's kind of amazing. I would have thought this would have been, I'm glad that this is a great reason. I'm glad you're on the show. I would have thought a lot of this was just straight up adaptation from the comics, but it sounds like he had a lot of creative freedom to kind of build out his own
He
version of
did,
this.
yeah, and I think some of it does come from the comics, but he's done it in a very consistent way. Whereas, comic book, you'll often get just random species that the artist makes up, for that spread. But James Gunn is using the same species throughout the movie, the same, some of the same selections, and from movie to movie. So it's not just random, made up as they go aliens.
Right. Scrolling down to setting and design, I've been watching a lot of practical. We talked about practical effects and stuff, but the locations are essentially all studio,
Hmm.
which makes sense because of the extreme places that we're going to. Other than London's Millennium Bridge is part of where Xandar's at, which is about the only place where they're filming on actual location. But I love all of the different. That's again kind of going back to Star Wars. That Morag is very different from
Hmm.
Xandar, which is very different from the Kiln, which is very different from Nowhere.
Right.
These places are built out so very well. So to different aliens, like you'd mentioned before, different technologies, different
Hmm.
colors, obviously. One thing I wonder always, and there's not really an answer for this, is when it comes to set decoration, how they got the tape deck to work on the Milano. It's awesome.
Right. Yeah.
How do you retrofit that?
Yeah. I've wondered about that.
But of course, I mean, the set decoration, probably my favorite thing is just, and there's so many Easter eggs in the warehouse, essentially, of the
Hmm.
collector, where you're just looking through and, I saw like a dark elf, obviously Cosmo's there. I saw Chitari this time, which I had
Oh,
missed.
yeah.
I think every time I'd
Right.
seen it. So many other things in there. And then props. Did you have any favorite props or set decoration things that you really liked from this film? Designs that you thought were interesting?
Um, I don't think it's in the first movie, but in the second, I got to name two of the blasters after my nieces. So that two of Rocket's blasters after my nieces. So that's pretty cool.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic. I didn't know that.
yeah.
What are their names? Do you mind?
Well, I'm just gonna let people get the book and find out. But yep,
Oh, see, that's even
it's
better.
in it's
Which
in
book is it in?
it's in the visual dictionary, and and the character Encyclopedia.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm gonna be
Yeah.
checking that out here shortly. Awesome. Yeah. I love all the troll dolls. From being, I grew up in the '80s, and so troll dolls were a thing I was very familiar with, and just seeing Yondu's fascination with those and all the little funky things on his dash. Those were fun. I'm looking down at characters. Speaking of Yondu, it was interesting, of course, that Yondu is, you'd mentioned before, there's so many different casts of the Guardians, that he's kind of the one original one, kind
Hmm.
of.
Oh yeah, you're right.
But yeah, Michael Rooker is fantastic in this. I like him more in the second movie. I think you're supposed
Hmm.
to like him more in the second movie, of course. But great cast. We've already mentioned Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista as Drax, of course. Vin Diesel as Groot, who says, "I am Groot." That's all he says, except for "We are Groot," of course. Bradley Cooper as Rocket, barely recognizable.
Hmm.
Thought that was
Right.
an interesting
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
Karen Gillan as Nebula, yeah, of course. Djimon Hounsou, I always love Djimon Hounsou. Basically, every movie he's in, he elevates,
Hmm.
I think. He has a small little part of score, I
Yeah.
think, part there. Benicio del Toro, of course. Almost forgot he was in this because he blends into
Right.
the
He
background so
does.
well. But I think we basically talked about everybody else. Seth Green, of course, is Howard the Duck
Hmm.
at the end, which is a fun little thing. Sean Gunn's in the film, of course. Oh, and it's the first time we see Josh Brolin as Thanos too.
All
That's
right.
another
Yeah.
thing. Again, as I was watching through this, I'm like, if it wasn't for Guardians, a lot of these things we just wouldn't have yet. So, kind of interesting. Scrolling down a little bit farther, hero's journey is usually a thing that we talk about if we can. And I think we've kind of already hinted at this a little bit. That, of course, we have Peter's journey,
Hmm.
but I think we have kind of journeys for everybody.
Right.
Yeah, well, Gamora is changing, Groot's changing, Rocket's changing.
I don't know if Drax changes very
Drax, of
much,
course.
does he?
I don't know, other than the fact that that's a good question. I mean, I'm thinking of the scene on Nowhere where he calls down
Hmm.
Ronan because he's almost got like a death
Right.
wish,
Yeah.
but he doesn't change that much in the film. But other than that he's kind of like, I think he recognizes that the rest of them are people of honor, and so he kind of aligns himself with that.
Hmm.
But he doesn't, I don't know if he necessarily changes. Rocket's kind of just guilted into it, I
Right.
suppose. By Groot. That's why he's kicking the grass. We also talked about world building quite a bit. I just mentioned in my notes here that it absolutely belongs in the MCU, fits in there, but it's absolutely its own thing too. It would totally exist on its own. I think it would be just fine. We talked about the music a little bit too. So, final thoughts on Guardians. What are some of your
I
takeaways?
think it's a classic of the Marvel Studios movies. It's one of the I think it's probably the most rewatchable film in the MCU. Watching it again recently, I just thought it stood up. It hadn't lost anything. It was just as fun as the first time. I think it's actually the first is better than the second movie. There's things I enjoy about the second movie, but I don't think the story is as great. The second movie, I think, is more about relationships and family and the interaction of the characters than the actual storyline itself. But I think this first movie, it's just a better package. It's more well balanced in all its attributes. So it's a very well rounded movie. It's kind of a perfect MCU film.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that, and I remember the first time I saw this movie and the
Mhm.
second one, I didn't really care
Mhm.
for it. I think it's just, it was different, but it's grown
Yeah.
on me. And this one especially, like, I really enjoyed this
Mhm.
rewatch, and was kind of just amazed at how well drawn these characters were, how easy it was, even though this was so outlandish, that all of the planets and the technology and all the mythology and all of these things, but I'm in, and I love the
Right.
music. So
Me too.
I'm looking forward to the third
Mhm.
one. A little bit, like you mentioned, a little hesitant, a little melancholy about that someone's probably going to die.
Right.
It's probably going to be sad, but it feels like it's probably, from what I'm hearing, it's going to be kind of a natural close to the
Mhm.
arc. So
Yeah, I think we might even lose more than one character, so kind of sad.
yeah, I'm trying to prepare my kids for that. I'm
Right.
like, it's probably going to
Yeah.
happen, but it's going to be okay. You can always go back and rewatch the other
Right.
ones. So, Adam, before I get you out of here, is there anything that you're able to plug and tell us about, things that you've got going on, or anything that you'd like to plug?
Well, nothing particularly new. Just I guess my for Marvel, I've got a lot of real popular books, especially for Guardians of the Galaxy. The Marvel Studios Visual Dictionary from DK covers both the films, and the Marvel Studios Character Encyclopedia does as well. For comics, I've got Marvel Absolutely Everything You Need to Know and the Marvel Encyclopedia, as well as Ultimate Marvel. Those will get you from the comics side of things. But people can order all of those directly from me. They can get them signed that way. And if people are interested, they can just reach out to me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. It's at author Adam Bray. That's the best way to get in touch with me and the best way to support me.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll have all that stuff in the show notes and make sure people know about your great books and how to get them. Awesome. Well, thank you, my friend. Thank you for jumping
You're
on.
welcome.
So, as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook, email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com, or use the SpeakPipe app on our website. If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend and support us by writing a review on your favorite podcast catcher. As you know, today we are giving one lucky listener a digital copy of Mission Impossible. All you had to do to enter was leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and email us that you left the review. And the winner of the Mission Impossible digital copy is Keith Cower. Congratulations, Keith. Be sure to forward your previous email to us, and we'll send you the code for the digital copy. For our next episode, we're going to be giving one lucky listener a digital copy of Mission Impossible 2. All you have to do for this contest is to join our email list by Tuesday, 5/9/23. The links for the email list are found in the show notes and on our website. The winner will be announced on the next episode of Reading Between the Reels. And finally, our next episode will be a review of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Send us an email or voicemail about your favorite moments from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and we'll share it on the next episode.